So our next session, Anshumali Baruah. She's hey, good to see you again. She's a user experience designer at Deutsche Telekom. She's a designer and theorist working towards mapping of customer experiences in voice, conversational AI, and associated emerging technologies. She's pretty smart. She's also excited about the potential of AI in providing she's really smart. I added that in. She's also use of AI in providing a fulfilled comments where most of us seem to be overwhelmed with technology. She's part of the Magenta Voice program at Deutsche Telekom in Germany at the Innovation Hub. There she designs experiences for Telekom's Hello Magenta Assistant. In the past, she's led a team which designed conversational experiences for Bixby, Samsung's intelligent assistant at Samsung R&D Institute, Bangalore, India. She's also led patents in the field of AI. And welcome, it's good to see you again.
Thank you for having me over.
And I'll give the floor to you. It's all yours.
Sure, okay. Just give me a heads up if you can see my screen.
Yep, got it.
Okay, cool. So hi everyone. Me being a designer, I am going to talk about the design processes and the design principles that we sort of engage with when we talk about conversational interfaces. So to do that, let me just quickly start. We will today be talking about how you want to present voice to your users. So when I say presenting voice, I talk about a few design principles that you should definitely keep in mind when you're designing for voice. We'll also talk a bit about pushing boundaries. Where is voice headed, and why that path of voice experiences or conversational experiences is something that we might see very soon. And lastly, we will see a bit about bridging this gap of technology and experience. And I will talk about this bridging the gap in terms of a voice platform and what should your thought processes be behind wondering if you should build a platform on your own, etc. So let's start. What should we start with? If we now talk about voice experiences, there is a plethora of different types of voice experiences that you can, think about off the top of your head. Say maybe IVRs, chatbots, skills, you name it, and there are different, people are trying out different ways to bring in voice into user journeys across products, across services. But having said that, there is primarily two types, where there is a voice-only experience, where there is no screen attached to a device. It's a complete hands-free sort of an interaction. It enables multitasking. Your hands might be busy doing something else, where you are, talking to the assistant or to the experience. It also embodies a bit of ambient computing in the sense that it no longer is a chunky old device that sits somewhere and you have to manually go and operate it. These devices nowadays are quite conspicuous and they can be anywhere around you. And these need to be basically just triggered with a wake-up word. And then we come to the multimodal experiences where, you have voice combined with, say, maybe a touch interface or with a remote control unit, or maybe even gestures when you talk about AR, VR experiences and voice that lets you game within that. So if you now talk about multimodal experiences, these also enable quick navigation within the devices that you are using voice in. But having said that, it also expands the device's own capabilities. So now, if you like, you can, ask for share prices onto your TV, if that's what you're into. These are again triggered with a wake-up word or with the physical button, usually both, which is the either-or sort of an operation. And nowadays, mostly when we look at voice assistants, these are contextual assistance. We have moved away from the simple question and answer sort of chatbot inspired conversational interface to a more contextual understanding of the users, and then giving responses accordingly. So what basically defines context? So context is, very simply put, the user's profile, what goals do they want to achieve, not just in the task at hand, but what persona do they, what user persona do they fit into? What are their personal goals? Are they some people who like things to be fast, where they are looking for very simple solutions upfront? Or are they people who look for very elaborate answers when they are asking few questions? So that's user goals. Then we also look at, say, conversational history. What have they asked in the past? What are their interests like? Their response, how do they respond to you when you as a conversational experience give them a certain answer? Is it delight? Is it confusion? Is it annoyance? That also gives you a lot of hints about the user's mood. If you have given the right answer, these are basically cues that come across, that can come across as context. And lastly, the knowledge of the environment that the user is in. So this is basically, people call it in different ways. It's world knowledge. These are basically general knowledge related questions that users might ask at the moment, what's ongoing around them. And that also gives us the context of the user. So most assistants nowadays read into this sort of data about the users or the world around them and help them. It basically helps identify the intent of the user much more accurately, and we can give them a much more simplified and easy to use and consumable response. So let's quickly dive into few principles that I will talk about. So a conversation is not just words, it's a lot beyond that. There are a lot of nonverbal cues and pauses that goes into telling us what's the actual intent behind a conversation. So if we now talk about few design principles, I will start with designing for context. So the way people deliver their speech, their location, like all the things that we talked about, these are some variables that should always inform your design. So now if I give you an example, if user is asking for, say, the directions to the Hyde Resort, the assistant can come up with a response which says, sure, the directions to the Hyde Resort from home, we understand that the user is at home, are coming up on your mobile. Maybe the user is speaking to the speaker and it's ridiculous to read out the entire directions on the speaker. So you direct them to the device of output. But you do give them a snippet of information out there. It says, it would take you 43 minutes by car. So here the intent was directions to the resort, and the response is to understand where the user's context is. In this case, is that the user is talking to the speaker, and direct the user to the device of output. The second one is the cooperative principle. This is the assumption that all participants in a conversation normally attempt to be informative, truthful, relevant, and very clear. To take an example again, if the user asks, is the Hyde Resort open? The assistant can inform the user that the Hyde Resort is closed at the moment. It opens in an hour. So intent again is finding out the business hours, but the answer is trying to be very relevant, because if it is closed, it does answer the query very correctly. It's not open, it's closed. But is it helpful? What would be helpful is to tell them when it's going to be open. So you tell them that additional information to be as precise as possible. And lastly, it's the very basic nature of conversations, talking in turns. It basically helps you take the conversation forward. It helps you repair conversations on the go and reduce the number of error cases that you might hit on. So what does it do basically with an example? So if the user says book a room at the Hyatt Resort again, so the thing is here the user has definitely given us an intent, which is reservation at the resort, but they haven't given us enough information to complete that task for them. So what do? You use a reprompt where you're now talking in turn and you're asking, when would you be visiting? And the user now has a chance to repair the conversation and not just abruptly end that so that they have to start all over again by just saying on the 10th and 11th of March. So the response now is, seeking more information to complete the task. It doesn't want to assume anything on behalf of the user, by which they're showing that the user is the one who's still in control of the conversation. And it also allows for a graceful recovery, where the user might have skipped that bit of detail, but you do not make them feel really sorry for it. They still have a chance to, get back into the conversation. Now, if I have to just give you a few more tips, the first would be to always design the system persona. Um, any person or device or system that you're going to talk to, the moment they start talking to you, you assume what kind of person or personality you're talking to anyways. So it's always good for brands to actually define the persona right out front, because that gives them a chance to put out their brand presence just before the people start assuming something very different. So it's always a good idea to start designing the system persona even before you start making your conversations. And lastly, always design for memory. Like how you would not talk to the person you're meeting for the first time the same way that you would talk to them when you meet them for the 10th time or something. So the same way, you have to make sure that your users feel that they have come back to someone who they can trust, who knows them, and it also gives them a sense of delight in the conversation. Even if it is customer support that you're doing with your conversational experience, I'm sure every time you might, the users will not end up, with the same queries, but it's always a good idea to maybe, if they're returning and a returning customer to your chatbot or conversational experience, it's a good idea to maybe address them with their name, maybe even have a little bit of graceful exchange in the beginning. Say maybe, how are you doing? Or is your earlier problem resolved? Are you facing any issues? That sort of a thing, where it comes across to the user that yes, the system cares for me. So that's a very important behavior within human psychology, and it helps to build trust. So please, keep in mind that it's high time we start building these little tips and tricks into our conversation designs. And second part of our presentation today, we will talk about how, going about pushing boundaries. So I did catch a little bit of a conversation, with the previous speaker. We were talking about why this high rate of adoption, etc. It's also coming from these studies which tell us that more than half of the time, or about half of the time that users start with voice, they eventually turn to a screen such as a phone, tablet, or computer immediately after. So even if there is, we see that the initial motivation for using voice is very high, but they also need reinforcement or validation of the response that they're getting. Did I hear that right? Can I see that somewhere? Can you give me a summary somewhere? It's basic nature that you want to validate what you just heard. And so what does that mean? It means that more and more experiences are trying to turn into multimodal experiences when it comes to voice and conversations. And why does this happen? If you now talk about the technology or the organizations who are building platforms from their perspective. Platforms are now, advancing to support crossovers across devices to enable these unique user experiences, which which are no longer, confined to just one device or of input or output. Secondly, it's a huge expansion of their device capabilities. And lastly, they get an embodiment of different services on multiple devices, not just their own brand. They can now augment other brands and their partners onto multiple devices, where they might not have been traditionally present. So that's a huge avenue that suddenly opens up for a lot of technological organizations by going the multimodal way. So if I have to now talk about what are the different types of multimodal experiences, of course, the first one is hands-free, where the end-to-end conversation happens without the press of a button, but there is a screen towards this, where hands-free can even happen on your mobile. It can even happen on your TV. So it again depends upon whether your platform has this capability or not. The second one is a hands-on experience, of course, where users might start a conversation with the push of a button and the system responds. And lastly, there are far-field communications, where there are a mix of hands-on and hands-free devices, hands-free interactions, and device itself forms the pillar of context. So here, the very common example for far-field nowadays is the experiences with TV. Where depending upon whether you are asking for a very detailed response or you are asking for a very simple query, you might be given a voice output, or you might be given just a text on the screen. Because with the TV, there is always this working assumption that if the user is asking something to the TV, they're looking at it also. So that's what I mean here when I say that the device forms the pillar of context here. But why is there this buzz? Now let's talk about this multimodal buzz around users, organizations, and the evolution of voice technology. So me being a designer, I will jump into users first. So the first one is that it empowers users. It's very human. Me, if I look for certain information, and I am processing something which I'm listening, plus I'm reading something about it. I'm using two of my senses, and I can take that information in much more quicker, and I feel more confident about that information. And that's the same thing. It empowers users to understand things more quickly. Brands are now seen as embracing the context of the users. They are no longer trying to push for their presence, but they are now trying to integrate their brand presence into the consumer's conversational experience itself. And thirdly, the device-specific personalizations that are now seen with voice, it's amazing. Like, I might want very long responses when I'm on my TV, because I can read them out loud even if your voice response is very short. I would like to see much more information. There are platforms that lets you set that out. So that's really amazing, because it also opens up the gates for diversity, inclusion, and it helps get more users on board. And lastly, it's the perceived usefulness that comes with it, where you're validating your same information channels, and you are grasping information at a much quicker rate. Even though it's not really a quicker rate, people feel it's quicker. That's why it's a perceived usefulness. So then if we move on to organizations. For organizations, it's amazing. Your brand presence is no longer confined to a sticker on a device, but it can expand so much more, as the tonality and persona of the assistant in the different earcons that you are using with your assistant. Earcons are basically audio icons, which you use to help navigate the user in their voice experiences. And secondly, there are a lot of smart devices in most of these organizations in their product portfolios. Now, voice gives them a chance to bring in a unified experience across these devices. And that's something which is really exciting. And a lot of companies are doing some phenomenal work around that. And lastly, I'll come to the evolution of voice technology. Here we see that there is a strength in efficiency, When I say efficiency, you see, you talk about different data sets that we can now get on the same conversation in different devices. That's great because we now understand what is most crucial for a user when they're speaking to the TV versus when they're speaking to the speaker using the same service. The second one is that voice is both fast and slow at the same time. So what do I mean when I say that? Voice is fast when we speak, but it is slow when we are listening. So we read faster than we listen. So, evolution of voice needs to sort of accommodate that. The easiest way is to go multimodal. And lastly, the, way we had predicted that voice would be, it would change the whole scenario and we would all be just talking to our devices simply. Yes, to an extent we do, but not at the rate that we had expected. So the stickiness of the voice only approach is very low. That's where you need to go multimodal to bring in these experiences for your users. And lastly, I will quickly talk about bridging the gap. I know I'm a little short on time, I guess. And
lots of questions.
Oh, okay. So maybe I will skip.
I do.
Yeah. Okay. Maybe I will skip the quotes, but I will just talk to you about when you're starting out with voice experiences. Please ask yourself these questions. Are you building a unique voice platform? Or are you solving for a very particular problem in your service with voice? Or are you building a chatbot versus /IVR to handle your customer service queries? So there are very different levels onto which you might want to step into when you're starting out with voice, because based on what you want to do, the workload could be phenomenally different. So to help you sort of answer these questions a bit, I will just give you what a unique voice platform would demand. It would demand that you have a vision. What's your big idea? What is the problem that you want to solve with your platform? And what is the best way to solve the user problem that you are going to address? Understand what your core domains are. What are the few things that you want to do really, really well? In what way does it align to your company's business? Understand the system persona. How do you want to come across as? What are your certain quirks and traits that you want to show across to your users and they would love it? And lastly, the markers to drive all the conversations with the assistant. It's basically your north point. And lastly, think of a design system and make it to translate. It helps you translate a very seamless experience across multiple touch points. It also speaks of your brand and helps you in sort of putting out your brand and design in front of your customers in your conversational experiences. And lastly, ask yourself if your platform is ready for the user's mental model. We do think that our conversational assistant behavior or conversations with assistants have reached an almost human-like behavior. But please let me be honest, most products still have a very basic natural conversation quality only. We still haven't achieved quite a bit of if you want to call yourself advanced, that would be stretching it too far. Understand what is the purpose of your assistant, call it out very specifically. Users are forgiving, but they expect you to hear them. Do a lot of user research, try to get them on board for some co-creation experiences, because voice is new for all, and it might even get them to be your advocates. And lastly, design for user frustration. It is very, very much real, and especially with voice without a screen, it's really, really bad. So that's something that we have to design for, along with the happy flow. And with this, I would leave you with this quote, and Thank you for listening in. I hope I'm on time.
We are out of time. Unfortunately, no Q&A. I let you go. I had a lot of questions, but I didn't want to break your flow. But thank you so much. It was very interesting.
Awesome. Okay. Please feel free to reach out with your questions in case you have any. I would be happy to answer them.
Thank you.